I'm Jesse Lazar. I'm the Executive Director here at AIA New York and the Center for Architecture. We're so glad to have you for the second in our 2025 AIA New York Presidential Series, Designing for Public Life. The series is stretching across this year and is leading up to an exhibition that we're excited to be working on now that opens in early October, Searching for Super Publics, which is in collaboration with curators' new affiliates, where we're seeking to define and explore the new era of public space in New York. This all grows out of AIA New York's 2025 President Ben Gilmartin AIA's theme, CUIRL, Designing for Public Life. Tonight's program will feature Georgeen Theodore from Interboro Partners, Josh Langham from the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and Benjamin Gilmartin from AIA New York and Diller Scifio Renfro, and will reflect on the value of long-term partnerships between designers, city agencies, and community partners to promote health and joy in New York's outdoor spaces. To get us started and share some thank yous to those who've made this series possible, please welcome Ben Gilmartin to the podium. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm more or less doubling down on what Jesse said, but I'm very grateful to have all of the supporters of my President's Circle this year, again, as Jesse mentioned, supporting my theme, which is CUIRL, Designing for Public Life. So I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge them, and then to say that this is a series that's looking at the state of design of the public realm and the status of our public life in the city through a whole bunch of different lenses during the course of this year. And I'm doing this with my partner in crime, Anne-Marie Baranowski, who's helping me to organize a series of dialogues in addition to the exhibition that Jesse mentioned. So we had an opening dialogue here on April 17th. We did something with ICFF a week ago and Susanna Drake. And then we're doing the event tonight, and subsequently Ron Schiffman and Mindy Full of Love, Mabel Wilson, Kate Orth, and Mary Miss upcoming across a whole spectrum of topics. So I just wanted to simply announce that I'm actually going to wear two hats. So I'm doing my presidential intro right now, but I'm going to hand over to Shachi to actually introduce the event and the speakers this time, which I will be one of, so as well. So Shachi. Thank you. Oh.
Thank you, Ben. We're very excited to be sponsoring this event, and from the Planning and Urban Design Committee on this important dialogue on how we can promote active design and healthy behaviors through design in our public spaces. We have a salon series called Modes of Practice, in which we are exploring diverse ways in which urban design and planning are practiced today, and we've had a few events at Perkins Eastman and the Pratt Institute and at Grimshaw, and I just wanted to let everyone know that our next salon event is on Thursday, the 5th of June, which will feature Scape, and then the following one on the 10th of July, which will be at Borough Happold, about their works of their cities group. I also just want to invite everyone next week at the ULURP panel with Municipal Art Society and the American Planning Institute. With that, I just want to thank you for that, and I want to introduce the panelists. Josh Langham is the Director of Active Design at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. His work focuses on increasing opportunities for physical activity and overall health through the design of the built environment. Josh's multi-agency and cross-disciplinary projects and programs aim to implement active design and strategies in citywide policies and initiatives, and he oversees the implementation and evaluation of the unit's active design in schools and placemaking programs, and is also currently leading the update on the city's active design guidelines. Georgeen Theodore is an architect, urban designer, and professor at the New Jersey Institute of Technology's College of Architecture and Design, where she coordinates the Master of Urban Design program. She's the founder and principal of Interboro Partners, a multidisciplinary firm offering inventive and inclusive planning, urban design, and architectural design services. Interboro's work is founded on good listening, keen observation, and productive community engagement using a participatory, place-specific approach to create consensus around complex projects ranging from buildings, parks, and open spaces to neighborhood, city, and regional plans. And Benjamin Gilmartin, who already spoke, but I'll provide an introduction anyway. He is the partner at Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro in New York and has led public space projects for the Lincoln Center redevelopment. He has also collaborated on the design of the High Line in New York and the Zaryadye Park in Moscow, among many other public space projects. Ben is the 2025 AIA New York president, and he is going to be moderating the session. Thank you. Ben?
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm Josh Langham. As I said, I'm the director of the Active Design Program at the Health Department. Our role really is to amplify the role of architects and designers as a public health approach. We sit within the Bureau of Chronic Disease Prevention and the Center for Health Equity and Community Wellness. So today I'm going to give a little bit of background about our program at the Health Department, about active design, and then a little bit of background about our placemaking work, and then I'll throw it over to Georgeen to talk about our work with Interboro partners to really advance health and equity through community-led projects. So the New York City Health Department. So the role of the Health Department, of course, is to protect and promote the health of all New Yorkers. We know there are stark differences in health risks, lifespan, and burdens of chronic disease among New York City neighborhoods, especially among communities of color due to long-term investments, past racist policies like redlining, and all the things that we sort of have come to understand. Improving health in these communities requires a comprehensive, multi-sectoral approach that addresses gaps in policy and programming, aligning assets, resources, investment, and policy. So to achieve this, the Health Department has really made an effort to emphasize health equity as a primary concern for all of its programs throughout the agency, to ensure that every New Yorker has access to resources that support healthy individuals, healthy communities, and that is certainly true of the work that my team does around the built environment. So a little bit of background here, as you can see on this map. So Healthy NYC is the city's strategic public health plan. It was released around last year, around the end of last year. And so the main goal is really to increase life expectancy amongst New Yorkers. By 2030, the goal is to increase life expectancy to exceed 83 years. Of course, there was quite a drastic dip during COVID, and the city's goal is to reach back up to 82 years of life for all New Yorkers and to exceed 83 by 2030. So this plan includes focused investments to make improvements in key areas. And so while there are many factors that impact health outcomes, a key component of increasing life expectancy is ensuring that New Yorkers' neighborhoods support opportunities to be healthy. We know that disparities in built environment conditions and health outcomes, again, persist across New York City neighborhoods, but a place-based approach to addressing health priorities and working closely with our city agency partners, with the design community, with any sort of community-led organization is key to achieving these goals. So at the same time, it's vitally important, of course, to partner closely with communities to really better understand and address their unique needs in developing tailored solutions. So as you can see, life expectancy varies by 13 years across some community districts. That's, of course, unfair and unjust. As a city that has many resources for a lot of people, we really need to think about how we make those investments, how we actively invest in communities in the right way. So I'm going to give a little bit of background on active design. Hopefully most people are a little bit familiar with what active design is, but so the original active design guidelines were published in 2010. This was a multi-agency, multi-sectoral partnership between public health professionals, architects, and designers to really develop a set of evidence-based strategies in the design of buildings and neighborhoods. And at that time, it was really focused on the promotion of physical activity, reduction of chronic disease as related to physical activity levels. So it sort of broke up into these key concepts that I think we're probably all familiar with: active transportation, biking, walking, access to transit, active recreation, of course, ensuring that people have places to recreate, parks, open space, even within our buildings as well. And then active buildings, of course, I think you've probably hopefully seen some of those green signs around that telling you to take the stairs. That's part of the active design strategy, of course. open stairwells and those types of things, but also just places to get up and walk, get up to socialize is also part of active buildings. And then, of course, healthy food access. Certainly, that's a real issue for a lot of folks to be able to access and afford healthy food. So since the original guidelines were published in 2010, of course, the evidence base has expanded quite a bit. So, we understand the design of the built environment can impact not only just physical activity levels, but also social connections, mental health, and they're all interconnected, right? So if you don't feel well, you're not going to be physically active. If you don't have friends to go be social with, you're not also going to be physically active, and so they all overlap in a lot of ways. We also know through a lot of evidence and expanded evidence that high quality, well-maintained, attractive public spaces within neighborhoods have been shown to increase physical activity and reduce inequities. Visits to green space have been associated with increased physical activity levels, but as well as lower blood pressure and better mental well-being overall. Higher levels of neighborhood green space have been associated with significantly lower levels of symptoms of depression and stress and anxiety. So it really just goes to show that the design of the built environment, what you have access to, where you feel safe is vitally important to health outcomes. So I think we can all sort of relate with a lot of these things here as well. The research sort of broke down into these high-level buckets here, that the public realm and the design of our buildings has a major role to play in supporting health. So, enhanced connections to nature, prioritizing user comfort, so where people feel safe and comfortable, well-maintained spaces, where people can celebrate and see themselves and cultural identity in their buildings and neighborhoods and in their public spaces. Enhanced perceptions of safety, of course, sort of spans all of these things. So these all sort of intersect, and we know that making sure that we consider these things, make sure that we promote these types of things in the design of our buildings and neighborhoods can really have an impact on all aspects of health. So all of this work since 2010, we've been working on a long time to, as mentioned, make an update to the active design guidelines. We're hopefully going to be getting them out very soon, within the next month or so. And then, again, this has been a multidisciplinary, multi-agency effort to update these guidelines. As a health department, we sort of brought that evidence base and that research base to these things, but of course, it takes our architects and our friends in our other agencies to develop a set of guidelines that are evidence-informed that really focus on equity and promoting overall health and well-being. So these guidelines are really sort of emphasizing that the built environment has a critical role in promoting mental health, social connections, public safety, civic trust. So how your neighborhoods and your buildings look can really reflect how people trust their government to provide the things that are necessary for them. And of course, one of the major things that the new guidelines has is a focus on equity. So where are we investing in neighborhoods? How are we tailoring our approaches to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the various communities across the city? And they also emphasize the crucial role that robust, authentic, and meaningful engagement is to advancing equity. So making sure that we have a meaningful engagement process when we're designing our parks and we're designing our streets and we're designing our open spaces to make sure that these spaces reflect the communities that they're in. So now I'm going to sort of flip gears a little bit, but the Healthy Placemaking program, of course, relates to all of the work and all of the evidence-informed strategies that we as a health department are advancing. Again, this is a growing understanding of the importance of community-driven and community-led processes in shaping neighborhoods and its potential impact on health. A core part of this community-centered work, and it's not just with our team at the health department, but it sort of spans across different divisions within the agency, as this place-based community-led approach. But really embracing arts-based strategies, which includes creative placemaking. So in close partnership with local artists, cultural organizations, architects and designers, of course, to activate their spaces using art-based programming. This is not only foster community conversations about what creates health, so it sort of gives us a foot in the door to talk to communities about what they're facing in terms of their own health, but also celebrates the role of cultural assets in neighborhood health overall. So I wanted to briefly touch on sort of the evidence base behind this and why we as a health agency are, again, sort of interested in this place-based approach and these placemaking projects. So, really preserving and celebrating community identity through public art, community engagement, and collective efficacy has shown to have positive impacts on social ties, social connections. People who are involved in these projects have really had a sense of belonging, a sense of ownership over these spaces that can lead to care and all sorts of things. So neighborhood identity can take many forms, but reflections of culture and public art has been shown to instill a sense of belonging, feelings of restorations and comfort, and increased levels of local stewardship and sense of ownership. And of course, all can lead to better social cohesion and better mental health outcomes overall. So since 2015, these are just a sampling of the projects that we've sort of implemented across the city. We partnered with over 25 community-based organizations and local artists to implement over 40 placemaking projects across the city. This work was done in close partnership with our agency partners at DOT through their DOT art program, of course, and the DOT or the Parks, Arts and Parks program. So working within those ways to permit, to make sure that communities are supported and those things to make sure that these things happen. The program entailed small grants with community-based groups and local arts groups to work with the local communities around these to develop artwork that reflected local culture and supported local neighborhood serving efforts. Nearly all of these public spaces had never had public art in them before, so this was sort of new for the community. I think our role was really just to kick the process off by infusing a small amount of money, helping to provide technical assistance to work through the permitting processes, and we've sort of seen since then that some of these same groups have gone on to do their own public art installations and placemaking work. So of course, as a health agency, we want to be able to evaluate. So we worked with Gale Institute to develop a wide range of different types of evaluation approaches and efforts. So, there are place inventory worksheets, so working with the local groups to do sort of their own inventory of what their space might need. Observational tools, so trying to observe how behavior changes might have happened pre and post installation of these, of the various artworks. And then of course, intercept surveys, so talking to residents who were in and out of the public space pre and post as well. So, high level findings overall, of course, is, 90% of survey residents indicated they liked it. Like, no surprise, but we need sort of data sometimes to prove that this was actually great. 94% of park users thought the artwork makes it a nicer place to visit. 81% said that they would visit the park more often. Of course, that means essentially more physical activity, we would assume, right? And also more people said they would like to be involved in the efforts to bring more art to the park. And we also saw differences between the type of art that was involved, right? So if it was really reflective of the local community, more folks said that they wanted to be involved going forward. So overall, positive overall experiences here. So now I'm going to sort of talk about how we sort of adapting the work to really lead to longer term change. So we learned quite a bit from the first few years of our placemaking work. Again, findings from evaluation told us that local residents really wanted public art. They wanted this type of effort in their neighborhoods. They wanted to see improvements to their public spaces. And so as a next step, we really wanted to figure out how this placemaking approach and this collaborative approach with communities and the findings from evaluation and conversations could really lead to longer term change. So Georgeen will talk more about this in our approach with them, but how do we tie this to neighborhood planning processes? Our agency partners like city planning and other folks have been thinking about this as well, but how do we really sort of use our approach with long engagement, with evaluation to really build off of the community planning processes that are already happening? How do we use this placemaking approach to test ideas that we know are beneficial for health, but also that the community says that they need? So thinking about noise, thinking about heat, thinking about all those types of things. And again, this was sort of right before 2020, and when the importance of public space really became apparent. And so Georgeen, of course, will talk about how we sort of shifted our ideas about the implementation that we were doing in the Bronx. So I'll stop there, and I'll pass it over to Georgeen. Thanks.
Okay. Hello. Can you all hear me? Wonderful. Well, let me do my thank yous first. Thank you to, I don't know, is Jesse here? Jesse, thank you for hosting. Thank you to the AIA New York Center for Architecture for having us here tonight. Ben, thank you for all the important work that you do, and especially for elevating public space this year with your presidential program. Josh, it's been really an honor to work with you over these years, so I'm really excited to have this space today to talk. And also, Sashi, thank you to the Urban Planning and Urban Design Group at the AIA New York. I haven't come this round since it's been moving about in the city, but I have been participating over the year, and I encourage everybody to be a part of it. It's a great subgroup here at the center. I'm excited to talk about our work tonight, and this event has allowed me to kind of do a little connection and reflection with all the different projects that we've done over the years. And so, as Josh mentioned, I'm going to speak about the work of Interboro Partners. That's the architecture, urban design, and planning practice that I co-founded with Tobias Onborst and Daniel Dioka, and have been working with many of our collaborators over the years. I think some of our collaborators are here in space tonight, so thank you. So our office is very much focused on the public realm. It's focused on public space, and we work at a variety of scales, from the design of specific objects, like small pieces of street furniture, to public spaces. We do a lot of neighborhood planning. We do parks and playscapes, and very large regional plans. We also design planning processes, engagement tools, educational campaigns, books, and exhibitions. So I'm here tonight to present our cooling stations and other projects that we've done over the year with the Department of Health with Josh's team, which I think we first started working in 2019, so it's been many years and really fruitful iterative process. But before jumping into those projects, I thought it might be interesting to situate this work and the process that we co-developed, to situate it in relationship to the work that we had done beforehand. Early, and here you can see some of the projects that we've done with Josh and his team over the years. But before starting to work with the Department of Health, our office had gained a certain notoriety, I might say, for being experts in temporary public space. And some of our first built projects were experimental temporary public spaces where we used different tactics of borrowing and gift exchange. These were projects like Lent Space, which was a temporary public park and tree farm in Soho. It's no longer extant. We did this for the Lower Manhattan Cultural Foundation. Commonplace, this was our redesign of the U.S. Pavilion in Venice, where we made the courtyard and galleries more accessible, and all the materials were used someplace else after the project was over. Rest Stop, this was a temporary tree grove, an educational program for high school kids, and in this project we recycled and reused all of the materials in the project. And then most notably, our project Holding Pattern, which was the winner of the Museum of Modern Art's Young Architects program. And here we created a temporary public space in the courtyard of MoMA PS1 in Queens, and also dealt with reuse. And in this project, we asked PS1's neighbors if there was anything that they needed, and we designed and built some of those things that people asked for. And you can see them in this courtyard. Each piece was tagged. And then we gave people their stuff after the project was over. So this project really became much larger than the temporary installation itself. It became longer in its duration. It became larger in territory. And it also, instead of just working for one client like MoMA, we ended up working for hundreds of different community organizations in Queens. And so, you could say that even though the project started out with this kind of very defined site, the courtyard, it had a defined schedule, just one summer and one client, we expanded it. And so there was a clear connection between the temporary public space project and the larger neighborhood, a connection between the short term of the project and something with a longer timeline. So fast forward a couple of years, we were selected to lead one of the 10 teams for the Rebuild by Design initiative. I think many people in this room know this project, right? So that was a federally sponsored initiative that centered design and design thinking in the kind of post-Hurricane Sandy rebuilding process. And I think one of the reasons why we were selected for this project was because of the engagement approach that we had developed in holding pattern and other projects. But our approach in this particular project was really, on the one hand, to develop a large-scale, long-term regional strategy, right, with the short-term, more, let's say, on-the-ground, local community needs. And so what we did in this project was really to develop priority projects that match those community needs with the long-term vision. And we had used this kind of diagram to show that there was this kind of intersection between the large-scale regional and then the kind of the local, or what we had written at that time, the community approach. And so the priority projects really were at the intersection of those two, acting kind of like a matchmaker in the design process. So it was in this context of us working on many temporary public space projects, like holding pattern on what you see on the left, and then having this experience with Rebuild by Design, where we developed this longer-term strategy. And it was with this experience that we first started working with the Department of Health. Now, as Josh has already kind of given an overview, the Department of Health had like a long-standing placemaking program. And what we did when we started working together was that we built on those many projects and processes that they had been doing over the years, I think since like 2015. And with when we came on board, what we tried to do was to connect those placemaking projects with longer range planning initiatives. And so our focus, can you guys read those words from the audience? Is it clear enough? Okay. So our focus here was the Southern Boulevard neighborhood in the South Bronx, and that's one of the sites that Josh and his team had been working. And so what we looked to do was to really spend a lot of time talking to and meeting with all of the different agencies and institutional partners, with many community organizations and residents in the community, and we being a part of that kind of group, and to really work together to identify projects and to think of them not only in terms of their tactical, temporary aspect, but how can we actually connect those to these longer initiatives. And so with the different agencies and departments, we really learned about all of the different projects that DCP was doing, the projects that the Parks Department were doing, and so really trying to use that as the kind of DNA of the project. So we attended all of the, many public meetings. We went to community meetings, but we also designed some engagement activities ourselves. One of the things that we did was we organized a series of walks in the neighborhood based on different themes. And here you can see some of them, like we had people from DOT lead a talk talking about the projects that DOT was doing in the neighborhood, or we had people from the vendor project talk about the things that they were doing to protect vendors in the neighborhood. There you can see Josh I guess 5 years ago. And then also we met with different community organizers and representatives from the Bronx River Alliance. So really trying to see the neighborhood through the eyes of the people who were working and invested there. And so through that process, we identified, a long list, probably too many ideas, but we had a long list of different placemaking projects that were really matching some of the desires and the ambitions that we heard in the neighborhood with some of these longer term projects. Projects like to improve safety of pedestrians, or some people had this idea of doing a seed garden, or an early idea for a kind of a sound refuge, or even working with the bodega booths to bring fresh fruits and vegetables to bodegas in the neighborhood. So many different ideas. We ended up only building a couple of them, and those are the ones I'm going to show you today. So one of the priority sites that people really wanted to see improved was the entrance to Concrete Plant Park. Josh, if you've seen this one before, I actually flipped everything upside down. So north is actually down, but this will make it easier for people to see. So this is, here is Concrete Plant Park and the Bronx River, and the neighborhood is on this side here. And the park is actually really hard to get to because you have to cross over the Sheridan Expressway. You have to cross over the Amtrak line. And there's also the 6 elevated here screeching over the street. So it's a very noisy, cacophonous, and very dangerous place because there's a lot of industrial uses over here, so a lot of trucks rumbling in and out. And so this was, and this is the entrance to a really incredible park. And people in the neighborhood here really rely on it and use it, but you actually can't see the entrance, and it's really hard to get to. So this project, which we called Concrete Connection, was a collaboration with the artist Richard Chance. You can find him on Instagram if you want to look him up. But the idea was to really create a new entryway into Concrete Plant Park. So this is really washed out, so you probably can't see all the details, but the park is here, and this is Westchester Avenue, that big street that has the L above it. And so all we did for this project was we actually tried to create a new gateway going into that park, and we actually worked through the Department of Transportation's art program to do this, and we used the kind of well, I'll show you the work in a second. So here you can see what it looked like before the project. There's actually a really incredible Cass Gilbert station here. So maybe some of you are familiar with it. But this is the overpass going across the Amtrak line, and then the entrance to the park is here. And so what we did was we actually, using kind of the logic of like billboard printing, we, working with Richard Chance, we created this a new entryway that was a series of portraits of neighborhood residents getting ready to do the things that they like to do in the park. So here you can see we actually had these the opening day. We invited the neighborhood residents who had their portraits taken. This resident actually getting ready to go to the park, what she likes to do in the park. Here you can see, play basketball, or like in this case, kayak. And so what's interesting about this sort of work is, like for us, it's not only about getting something done on a kind of a very small budget, but more importantly, it's the process of getting these different groups and organizations, the city departments and the agencies to agree on collaborate. Are there any DOT people in the room? Yes, so it's a very intense process and very challenging, and I think that's really what we're using our design skills to actually get something done in that particular context. And so in a way you could say that the whole process really becomes a kind of co-creation with these, with others. And that's something that's really become important to us over the past couple of years, really this kind of design for co-design. So I just showed you this one site in the Southern Boulevard neighborhood that has, you know, a lot of, you know, Josh listed all the many things. Can you still hear me if I walk away from the microwave? The microwave. I don't even have a microphone. I don't even have a microwave. I don't know why I said that. But Josh talked about public safety. So the safety at that crossing is like really important. Another issue in the neighborhood is urban heat. And this is a map that shows heat vulnerability, which is a kind of index that combines different things. The amount of paving, the amount of trees, but then there's some other factors in there about, like say, people's ability to have an air conditioner and things like that. But what you can see, the pink shows the most vulnerable. And do people see what's over here? Central Park, right? There's no paint there because, you know, open space actually really, and parks really cool space off. But here in the South Bronx, where they're actually they're a much smaller number of, or square feet of green space and trees, there's also a lot of cars and trucks and pollution. This is one of the kind of the most vulnerable areas in the whole city. And so one of the other projects that we did was really related to this condition. So this is our project, the Refreshing Waters, and this was our first temporary cooling station, which really used very simple and tactical moves, like just simply painting a ledge to transform it into a public bench. And the project included just a misting line that was attached to this fence, a series of fans that blew cold or cooled air from that green space behind the fence, and then this bench or ledge, and then these chairs. And this was one of the neighborhood places that residents really wanted to see improved. Across the street from this fence is the New York Public Library, and when we first started this project, community members really wanted to see something happen here. They were really concerned about their public library being closed for renovations, and so we had done, actually Josh, I was looking through the whole deck of art. We had so many different, we must have had 20 different versions of this project before we actually did this, but we were hoping to do like a Wi-Fi plaza for teens when the library was closed. And we were even thinking about building a structure in the street. And what happened was that the pandemic hit, and the library closed even earlier than expected. And the library was a place where many of the senior citizens in this neighborhood went for cooling, because the library had air conditioning and it had a program for seniors. It's a major building project with many senior, a big senior population just next door. And so we decided in this project, even though we had this kind of longer term plan, we decided at the beginning of the pandemic to really just shift gears, and instead of building the kind of the structure that we were planning on doing that was going to take a longer period of time, we put all of our effort into just creating this cooling station that could be a pilot to think about how you could bring cooling outdoors when it wasn't safe for seniors to be inside. And so we ended up doing this project not only 1 year, but 2 years. Here you can see some of those just very simple moves. There's the ledge with the paint. There's the fence with the misting line at the top, and then the fan blowing the air out. And we actually even, what we ended up doing is actually painting these white lines, almost like the edge of a swimming pool, showing the six. Do people remember that 6-foot distance where you had to like keep distance from everyone else? So in many ways, you could say the project followed the tactics of like everyday urbanists when, you know, like a vendor will put her goods on a fence instead of renting a storefront. So it's like really trying to attach your design to something else so that you don't have to spend any of the resources on, you know, other materials or other stuff. So it's really doing the most with as little material as possible. So we just used that existing fence, the existing cool air that was, you know, coming off the ground and so on. And so we received support from many different departments and agencies. We worked with the Department of for Aging, the Mayor's Office of Resiliency. This was all, you know, stuff that Josh and his team really facilitated, bringing together all of the different representatives of these different offices. The Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice worked a lot with the Department of Transportation, Department of City Planning, New York City Parks, and even the EDC. And this, you know, ended up in, you know, a number of different reports and recommendations as, you know, something that should be replicated citywide. We also, thanks to AIA New York, we also got a AIA award, I think, last year in the projects category. And so we did the cooling station for 2 iterations, and working with the Department of Health, we sought to scale out to create a cooling network. And so we thought, and this was something that community members were really fighting for, like it's so hot. Has anybody walked around in the South Bronx in the summertime? It's really hot. And so the idea was, why not think about a series of nodes that then people could like walk from point to point and have these kind of cooling stations. And so the next, so this was the idea of like a cooling network, series of cool streets. And so the next project was what we ended up calling Watergate. Actually, our client actually came up with the name of that, someone from the Point CDC, the former executive director. But and with this installation or this version of the project, we worked to improve aspects of the previous cooling station. So we actually really improved on the misting. We used a pump. We actually got a kind of a much more powerful spray. And then the other thing that we did was we also changed the way that, well, we hadn't done a lot of, Josh talked before about data. We tried in the first versions of Refreshing Waters to actually collect data to show how impactful it was. Like we knew we were doing some good, but we were like, you know, how can we actually quantify that? And we even worked with, I believe it was DOT, we tried to take the temperature in that area, but the thing was is that the way that the city typically does the temperature monitors, they're really high up. And the impact of mist on the body is so micro scale that those kinds of sensors didn't pick it up. So what we did in this version was actually we used infrared photography to demonstrate what the difference in the temperature was. And so you can see this is very low tech. But what you can see here, there's Joe and Brandy doing the installation. This was a gate that we had just like painted yellow and tried to create this kind of misting wall. I would say there's other people other offices who have done much more kind of dramatic, blurry kinds of misting things. So this was really rough and ready. But what I'm really proud about here is that you can see right here, this is the drain. That's where the misting line was. And what you can see here is that the paving was like 110 degrees. This just shows what the yellow is. But then where the misting line was, the temperature had all of a sudden become 20 degrees, even more, 30 degrees cooler. And here you can see that the Watergate here, this is the street that the Point CDC is on, and we picked the yellow to kind of pick up some of the colors that were already there. But here you can see that when you walk down the street, we're talking like 120 degrees, and then when you come to this moment where the gate is with the mist, all of a sudden the temperature is much, much lower. And so then our most recent project with the Department of Health is what we call the Sound Pod. Now this is a little bit different, but so it's not a cooling station, but it's a sound pod. But it responds to another environmental stressor. If the previous projects were really looking at heat as an environmental stressor, here we're looking at or listening to noise. And our clients or our co-designers here are the students of PS 112 in East Harlem. And this is a school that serves early learners, preschool, kindergarten, grades 1 through 4. And a very high percentage of the students in this school are neurosensitive. Now the schoolyard, here's PS 112, the schoolyard actually directly faces the FDR Drive. And that's really unfortunate because the traffic, as you all know, creates a lot of noise. And so our challenge here was to create a temporary installation to mitigate this environmental stressor, the noise. And so in spending time at the school, we observed that teachers and students, they were already creating spaces to mitigate noise, and we used this as the starting point for this project to create what we called the Sound Pod. And so these, what you can see in these, I just love this one that says calm, but these are like little tents that people have in the classroom. And so we just kind of tried to follow the logic of that with this, with what we call the Sound Pod, but to kind of make it, it really became like this mobile piece of playground furniture. And so we did this, Department of Health and Interboro, we did this in collaboration with Andrew Koslow of John Minnie Landscapes, but the design here is basically, we had cork on the inside to absorb the noise. We had this kind of frame, and then we had this noise buffering top, and it's a tent, but we actually kind of tilted up the back a little bit to kind of make it more enclosed, but also give it kind of a little bit of a shape. And then the school's mascot was the bumblebee, and so we thought that made a lot of sense to make them look a little bit like kind of speak that language. At the school they have everything like, be smart. So anyway, and then we worked very closely with the teachers, and the teachers actually developed a curriculum to talk, to create conversations with the students about sound and like what are the sound sense students like. Because one of the things that we were really concerned about in a lot of the work that we had done throughout the years with Josh was that so much of the way that sound is dealt with in the neighborhood is really through kind of policing techniques, because like it's just really based on like, okay, if you hit a certain decibel, then it's illegal. But what we found is that there's some sounds that are really loud, like the ice cream truck, that bring people joy. And so what we did was, this is a little bit of a summary of a lot of the input that we had received from the students about the sounds that the kids like to hear. And so in the Sound Pod, we actually had these little buttons, and once the student goes inside of the Sound Pod, they can press that and actually get these other noises that they can choose themselves that would be enveloped in that space. And there you can see it on opening day. So it has just the frame, and then on the casters, and then the cork is on the inside. And so what you can see, there's the fence in the springtime. This was actually in October. It gets a little bit grown, but the traffic is right there, and just the noise is really intense. You can see this is right where the Triborough Bridge is kind of going across. What is the Triborough Bridge called now? Okay, thank you. And then just to kind of give a little bit of an update, one of the things we've done, or I've done, is that I've been building on all the work that we did with Josh and his team. We actually did another cooling station, but this one is in Athens, Greece, that did in a workshop with students. Basically, here you can see some images of it. This is the first freestanding one, but it really follows the logic of the kind of the temporary scaffolding system that is used throughout city of Athens. And so we worked with Thanos, who is like a scaffolding entrepreneur. He basically does this for buildings all over the place. And so I think I need a video. I hope it will work. Let's see. Yep. Is it gonna work? Let's see. Does that work? Yeah. So here you can see, so we just, over the course of like a couple of days, we worked with them and we set this up. We painted it, and then using kind of like the everyday materials that you see in a lot of restaurants, we only had a very minuscule budget, and just used that kind of like bamboo shade structure and wrapped it over the side, and then had misting line in this as well. We're looking a little bit at how to create shade and stuff like that in the neighborhood. And we painted it that color because it's like a color that you'd see a lot in the neighborhood. And there you can see it on the opening day. And it actually really has a kind of like a nice, even though it's just like a temporary project, I think it really works as an urban object, kind of continuing the street wall on one side. And that's it.
Hello. So wonderful presentations. Thank you so much. I think we'll just do a brief conversation to kind of warm things up amongst ourselves, and then I'm sure that a lot of people in the audience will have questions that they would want to ask that are probably going to go deeper. I think there's things to talk about. Many things to talk about, the kind of temporary to permanent, the implementation of these things in a longer term way, the writing them into kind of RFPs, the kind of cross-disciplinary or cross-departmental, cross-agency collaborations to kind of bring them about, which I'll kind of give in a few minutes go into. I wanted to open with a kind of a bigger scale framing, which is, I would say that my interest this year in the public realm, public space, and public life in New York City, and kind of what era are we in now, is looking at the intersection of the public realm with major issues like climate change and coastal resiliency, with issues of justice, equity, environmental justice, with, of course, post-pandemic health and well-being. And I guess, even though you've spoken to it in your presentation to some extent in very nice ways, I would love to open with making the case for why the public realm intersects with our collective health in ways that are essential, fundamental, and perhaps unique. Like what do they offer, particularly to our civic, cultural, and social lives, health beyond simply our physical health? And what does the public realm offer that, say, our private spaces of our life maybe don't offer in the same way? So, I don't know if you both have thoughts on that question to start things off.
Yeah, I mean, a lot, I think, right? Like, I think, from the evidence base, at least, we just know that being in a neighborhood that you feel safe in, that you can go outside in, that you can spend time in, is good not only for your physical health, but it is where you meet people, right? It's out, especially in New York City, right? You don't have necessarily, unless you have a big apartment, you don't have people over, right? You meet them outside. And you don't want to feel unsafe walking out into the sidewalk. You don't want to feel unsafe crossing the street. Those can really hinder a lot of people's efforts to be outside and be social. And as I sort of showed, all of these things are interconnected in a lot of ways. So, I mean, I think we all just experience it every day, how you can go from one neighborhood to another and you feel different. You either feel welcome or you don't. And I think particularly for younger people and older adults as well, like feeling safe and welcome in public space is really important. The way it's designed, do you have a place to sit if you need it? Is there a sidewalk free of cracks and uneven sidewalks that you feel safe that you're not going to fall? As for a lot of our work that we do in schools and with youth in general, they feel like they're not welcome anywhere, right? And I think we've all probably been annoyed by a teenager out in public space before, but that's because they feel like there's no place for them to be. And so I think the public realm offers just numerous ways that it supports mental health, physical health, and social health. And certainly bringing that health lens to it is important as we work with our other city agencies. As a health department, that's really what we offer. We don't really build anything, but we can say that we're elevating the usefulness of public space as it supports health. And I think if we think about climate resiliency, instead of building a wall, you can build green space, right? Because we know that's good for mental health. It's good for people that are out in public space, that you have trees and nature and green infrastructure that really supports all these aspects of health. So I think there's a lot of ways that you can connect the dots there.
Yeah, I would also refer back to Josh's slide, which looked at life expectancy. So, really where you live, like what zip code you live in, has an impact on longevity. And I think that so many of the factors that are kind of built into that, like, the heat, the air quality, they're so much connected to the public realm. And so that slide that I showed with the pink, right, there's really like a very strong correlation between areas that have actually green spaces and have lower temperatures and less vulnerability, and areas that don't have green spaces have higher vulnerability. And that's seen across a number of different indicators. I mean, open space is not the only, green space is not the only aspect of the public realm, but in this case, I think it really is very much at the intersection of health, public life, and what is just and fair. And I think that's where I think a lot of the work that we're all doing, all of the people who are in this room, working on design, that there is really a kind of this correlation between public space, open space, and well-being, and the people deserve to have that distributed in an equitable way across the city, and we're not there yet.
Agreed. Okay, maybe I can roll a couple of thoughts that I had together into one question in the interest of time. There's a huge investment that you both made in engagement, I would say, like maybe disproportionate to other design practices or areas of design practice, where your time investment to kind of determine where interventions need to happen and what's the appropriate intervention that's very precise to communities is, it's very research-based, it's very time-intensive, there's a lot of shoe leather or whatever, the right kind of like meeting people for hours and hours over and over repeating. And I guess maybe there's a question, the collapsing of two questions would be sort of like, how do you make that a sustainable approach as a practitioner so that this work can continue and more people can engage it? And how perhaps does the work that you do scale up as there's opportunities to do larger scale, more permanent work in the public realm? So I don't know if those are the right kinds of questions, but I can see in both of your cases years and years of work to even to have these impacts that you've indicated in these spaces. And it's like, how does this become part of the work of delivering public space, and how do you scale it and make it sustainable?
Well, I would say that it's really hard, but I think that if Josh and his team didn't make that a priority, we wouldn't be doing it. And so I think that there are, advocates within the kind of city ecosystem who recognize that that is important work. And so I'm really grateful for the space that Josh and the Department of Health have made to do this kind of work. But I think the general problem is that, like, when we look at the way that projects, like the way that people develop budgets and fees for an architecture project, it's not based on like engagement, and I think that there's really a mismatch between the need to do that kind of engagement and the way that we actually get paid. And so that there's basically, people don't, because of the expectations of how a project fee should be developed, there's really, like, if you say, like, oh, I need to spend, 500 hours or 100 hours or 75 hours, I think people don't want to pay for it. And so I think that that's an important role that, like, say, the city and and other organizations, like-minded organizations, or public-minded organizations can really sort of advocate for that investment.
Yeah, and I think we even learned that we didn't have enough time a lot of times for the engagement, right? Because we were tied to a fiscal year, right? And so, in our current program, we've tried to be a little bit more flexible in how we contract, and this is just for these small temporary pop-up spaces, right? But at least from, a health agency, and, it showed that the active design guidelines are coming out, like, we really want to emphasize that is a critical piece to any built environment project, that engagement piece. It does have implications for health. It does have implications for the success and the longevity of any sort of project. And that continuous engagement is also important, right? Making sure that you're continually designing and making sure that the spaces that you're building continue to meet the needs of your communities and your neighborhoods. So again, I think, from the health department perspective, we just want to keep adding to the evidence base that says these things are important. They can have this impact on health outcomes, and then tie it to the work that our agency partners are doing. And like all of the agencies that we talk to, they want to be doing better engagement. They want to be doing these things, but as Georgeen mentioned, there are a lot of budget constraints. We're tied to fiscal years. We don't know how to support this in a way that's authentic and meaningful in a lot of ways. But I will say that the city has made some progress in this arena. City planning has a civic engagement studio. HPD has a neighborhood planning process that they're trying to implement, and a lot of our other agencies as well, like DDC, is trying to do this. So it's not that no one wants to do it. I think it's the mechanism and the way to do it is the challenge. But again, we hope that the release of the new ADGs will sort of help move that along. It can be used as a tool that's saying that we should be doing these because it does really matter for health.
Can I add another thing? Is that, with the projects that we have done, we have tried to use as little materials as possible, but you get penalized for doing as little as possible when it comes to being paid for your services. So I think that's a problem.
You get paid as a percentage of the cost of the construction budget as
Yes,
your fees.
exactly. So you know how much the materials cost for refreshing waters? It's like under $10,000. And so, but then it just even to like, it's just, there's just a kind of, I think, misalignment in the way that we think about charging for our services. That, I mean, I feel that, really we have a responsibility to try to do the most with the least amount of materials, but the way that there's no incentive for most firms to do that kind of work.
Maybe I'll ask two more questions. This one should hopefully build on what you just said, but you listed all the agencies that you spoke to or that you worked with. I think you're sort of a kind of an activist in a way amongst them, trying to elevate this issue with your partners in the city, but you listed, DCP, DDC, EDC, Parks, DOT, et cetera. Forgive me for the ones that I've left out, but these are big, powerful entities. They have huge budgets. They're doing work all over the city in many different ways, or at least engagement, development of projects. And maybe I have this kind of fantasy of almost like a Department of Homeland Security that lives over the top of them all, but it's really the Department of Public Realm that they all answer to, and it kind of coordinates across all of them. But if you saw an opportunity, like what would be the things that would sort of bring, like each of them has a piece of the puzzle in public space, you know, it crosses the street to the park to the, you know, the mechanisms for contracting, delivering, who does the work is another. And so how do you bring all these parties together and kind of build common understandings about the importance of public health and the importance of these initiatives and the role of engagement that you're talking about for design professionals? I think they're all open to it, but how do you kind of build projects in that kind of the kind of magnificent infrastructure of the city that all has a piece of this work?
Yeah, that's a challenging question for sure. I think, you know, and all those agencies report to different deputy mayors and all that stuff. So like, you know, this one overarching entity within City Hall might be an answer to that. I think, you know, those are explorations that we want to continue to do with our agency partners about how to structure things differently. I think this has probably been talked about here before, but comprehensive planning for the city of New York might be able to help direct agencies to work in certain parts together. But I know, you know, agencies try, they certainly do, right? But every time you sort of talk to somebody, then they're like, well, we're also doing X, Y, and Z in this neighborhood as well. And I think it has implications for, you know, engagement fatigue in some neighborhoods. Over and over again, we're talking to this agency, we're talking to that agency, and we haven't seen anything happen, so now we don't trust you anymore. You know, like it has a lot of implications for not collaborating closely. But you know, our relationship with the folks that are helping develop the active design guidelines is great, right? We have an interagency committee. I think everybody's sort of bought into this and they want to work together. But I do think some overarching structure would be helpful, and something that lasts administrations in a lot of ways. That doesn't change every once in a while. So you know, that would be great if that happens. That's one solution, of course. But you know, the agencies have figured out ways to work together in the past. It could just be piecemeal, but I think there's certainly a want to do that.
Yeah, we had I mean, maybe it's not a term that people are talking about all the time, but you, the Department of Health had convened, or you were part of this interagency meeting, and we brought our work on these projects to that group, and then somebody from DOT would be like, oh, well, we're doing this there, or EDC would say, well, we have this upcoming project, and so there was that opportunity to discuss the projects in relationship to one another. But I guess it's just really like when there's so many pressing needs, it's a question of time. I do think like, I don't think like it has to be like, you know, architects to the rescue, but I know that in our work in Detroit, where we have worked on a couple of projects that bridge between different departments, like the project that we did for the vacant schools, where we helped the city develop a strategy for all their vacant schools. It was something that we designed as part of the process, a space of discussion among the different departments. So I think one of the things that we've been trying to do is bring a lot of the engagement work that we have done over the years that has really been focused mostly on the public. We've been now bringing that to not so much in New York City, but in other cities, to bring that kind of thinking, to bring different voices within a city organization that are typically siloed, to bring them together on a project and create a space of discussion and you know, kind of design iteration to have those things, you know, cross between like the police department and the planning department and the group that deals with building violations and so on and so forth.
That's great. Last question, then I'll turn it over to the audience. Probably has much better questions, but I am interested in design almost in a traditional sense, that I think even though public art and murals and things like that are very important in identity in the city and things like that, your work, even at a low budget and even if temporary, has a strong design approach to it, an aesthetic agenda that's about identifying the space in a particular way. your use of color, your kind of, the way that you deploy things has a kind of particularity to it, I would say, from a design point of view. And I would add, in the active design guidelines, there is a kind of elevation of certain design approaches and examples and things like that that become important to, say, elevating the quality and making the spaces attractive and kind of yet making them specific to their place. So I guess if you could just say a little bit about the importance and the agency of design in the process as well, because I think it is important.
It's funny, when we did Holding Pattern, which is now quite an old project, but you saw an image of that where we had asked people, different community members, if they needed anything and could we build it for them. And we built those things, but we built everything with like a specific formal quality and with a specific, everything was done in like marine grade plywood, and it had a material quality. And I remember when the project came out, Damon Rich wrote a kind of a critique of the project and asked, well, why does everything have to look so uniform? Why can't you just buy other items off the shelf and just give people what they want, but not have that kind of aesthetic stamp on it? And I thought it was a really brilliant question, and I think that the way that we think about our work is, and thank you for recognizing it, because we really work hard on that, but I think we're trying to create a space of design dialogue between all of these different entities, but we have a voice too. We have an expertise too that we bring to the table, just like other people bring their expertise, and part of that is about form and material and those kind of qualities that we all spend so much time on when we design something. And so I think it's bringing our voice, one of many voices, into the urban space.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that I think there can be a particular aesthetic to whatever the outcome is of the design and the architect that you work with, but I think what's really exciting and fun is like taking what you've learned from the engagement process and translating it into a final product that looks like it's intentional, that looks like it's not expensive, but like it's well done, right, and well maintained. And we also know from the research that when something looks like it's as well maintained, as well cared for, as intentional, and it's going to last a long time, people feel a little bit differently about spending time in that space, right? They might care about it a little bit more, and people feel like that's valued and like they're valued in their own neighborhood. So I think it is really important that you have high design, that you have high quality design in your spaces, but also the engagement process that sort of influence the final outcome is also, equally important.
Thank you. I guess we could open it up to the audience now for some questions. I think, Samara, are you going to bring the mic? Okay.
Hello. Last week there was a pitch fest, which was for the New York City public agencies that were trying to find, like, people come up with ideas and thoughts and all that. So one of the things that when we talk about, Josh, when you spoke about health and mental hygiene, who are the cities for? The cities are for everybody. And we have a lot of people in the city, like especially like the homeless population. Do we design public spaces for them, or we just let them be somewhere in the corner and not even think about them? Don't even want to look at them because it's not really a pleasant thing to be doing that. So I think I just want to put that to you, Josh. Mental hygiene is important, right? So let's think about what the city would want to do for that. And of course, Georgeen, your presentation was just amazing. Such wonderful work you're doing. And of course, one thing that comes to my mind is I've been working on a campaign for car-free Broadway from Union Square to Columbus Circle. And of course, we've been also looking at all the areas that are very hot, the temperatures, especially summertime, because there are very few trees along Broadway. So like thinking about what do you do, how do you make spaces better for the people? So of course, the misting wall you have and the fans and all that. Fans I never thought about before, but then that's a great idea. Is also a low-cost thing to be providing that, and of course the misting walls, etc. But I also wanted to think about the new development, rather the new zoning change for Midtown South and mixed-use development that's being proposed right now. Of course, they have not done their EIS at this point, like how they're going to deal with the heat and everything. So there will be about 10,000 new residential units could be proposed with a zoning change there. And while we are going to be building new buildings or modifying old buildings, a conversion of office buildings into residential units with additional FAR and all that, why not get the, of course in the AIs, why not also get some inside spaces within the buildings, so you have outside and inside. People who are outside, they can also walk into the lobbies or certain parts of the building where they can also get cooling. Like the libraries you talked about, of course, they don't like to have disheveled and homeless people sitting in the libraries and all that. Unfortunately, that's how we all look at that population. So think about like what we can ask the city agencies, the planning commission and all, to provide some public spaces within the enclosed new office buildings. Those would be nice and cool places for everybody. Thank you.
I mean, yeah, I could just comment really quickly just about, inclusive public spaces, right? Like, everybody's, like, these are New Yorkers, right? They should have access to these public spaces. But as a health agency, as a city, we also need to provide resources for these people to help them if they need it, right? And so defensive architecture or the hostile architecture, all of those types of things that are sort of, used at times, I don't think that's inclusive. I don't think we should be using those things. But as a city, we also need to provide the right resources to help people who are struggling or going through whatever in public space, right? And so, there's a multi-pronged approach, right, to public health. Public space is one aspect of it that can support many different aspects, but there's also the resource and treatment side that is also necessary.
Ben and I, we both have worked on a project, Housing for the Homeless, and since that time, I'm very conscious about seeing the conditions of the homeless and of course, what can be done, or at least thinking about what can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, opening up private spaces for public use, like the POPs program, all those types of things are important, right? And I think as we only get hotter and hotter, there's only so much shade can do, there's only so much that misting lines can do, and so, there have to be other solutions as well that we need to be thinking about.
In the back.
Hello. First of all, thank you both. Sorry. First of all, thank you both for your presentations today. I guess I have a question about the urgency behind this. I think especially with issues like urban heat in cities like New York, but cities all across the globe, there's a real deep urgency that I think is maybe missing in the room. I'm wondering actually what happens to the hardening. Like at what point do we turn policy what point do we turn guidelines to policy? At what point do we turn pop-ups to permanent? And how, as architects and designers, do we work with maybe unlikely partners to bring catalysts and energy to the kind of urgency the climate issue has in the city?
Thank you for that comment. And yes, there is incredible urgency. And I do think that, one of the traps of these temporary public space projects are that they just are not, they're insufficient. So I think that I didn't really talk about it too much, but I think one of the things that we do hope is that by doing these early projects that they're not going to solve all the problems, but I think that what they can do is they can actually help shape the longer term projects and potentially bring more of the community interest in those larger projects that then maybe change them. So like I think with the work that we did for Rebuild by Design, a lot of people had these kind of long-term, like a lot of the solutions that we need to do to address the climate crisis, they're so far off. It's getting closer and closer every year. But I think that you don't want to be in the position where you are locked into something. Like a lot of these projects, like Ben was talking about before, that there are these kind of bigger citywide projects that have massive budgets and they have many, many, many years of planning and development. And I think thinking about how we can intervene and work within those larger projects to bring not only the important moves that are about like addressing urban heat or dealing with stormwater and flooding, but also really making those investments work on a different level that really meet the needs of what people who live in a place want and need. I think we have to, with every single project, try to kind of double up and make it do more than one thing. So I think you point out an important unmet need, and I think we're all working on it, but I think it's not solved.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously there is a sense of urgency for a lot of these things, right? And so, we really hope that just like with the release of the first active design guidelines in 2010, and there was sort of a series of policies that were changed to make sure that those are able to be implemented, and we hope that that's going to be also what happens when these new ones are released. I think the work that we do with these temporary pop-up and this placemaking program is part of this evaluation and demonstrating that these things work and that they're important, but also continuing as a health department to work with our agency partners to make sure that those types of things that we know have been successful or things that we know communities like or that they feel like they met their need are integrated into other agency processes and policies going forward. But there's a lot of different efforts and things that need to happen for policy to change, and so sometimes that can come from elected officials, right? If they're interested in something can move forward. So there's also the other side to that as well to get things moving forward quickly.
I have a question. Some years ago, this chapter has gotten involved in two, I would want to call them street furniture. The first was when bike racks were redesigned and competitions were held, and then there was a new bike rack. And the second time was when the scaffolding, it was, buildings, had 30-year scaffolding permits, and there were these white scaffolds that were now supposed to be implemented everywhere, although it doesn't seem to actually be happening. But I'm sort of wondering, what I'm seeing with this is that your, quote, kit of parts should really be branded as something that is part of the AIA's chapter of what you can do on a small scale to improve our city life inch by inch, because it doesn't mean that, a park in the Bronx is any worse than a park on the west side, even if someone thought to put it there. That you could, seriously just have all this stuff, and then people could, every block's got a block association. So you could very easily just have something that could be implemented relatively cheaply and part of our, let's improve our city.
Definitely, I think we would love to do that. Again, I think it's a question of resources. I think it would be great to do that. And yeah, yeah, I do. I mean, going back to the, I think some of these questions. I do think though that design can play a really important role in thinking about how to make the most of every single move. Like, so if you're doing one project, how to build in, zero, like how to get zero carbon and how to manage your stormwater and to also think about the urban heat island effect. I think that that's kind of one of the key things that we can do as designers is to really think about all of those things at once. But I think the challenge is that there's just still not enough teeth in a lot of the rules to make those things required. And so I do think that, like, with the primary coming up, and, I think we have to continue to kind of advocate for design at, politically, and to make sure that those issues are kind of foregrounded. And I think the kind of the data collection and the evidence that we have from different projects to help that along is important, an important piece to that puzzle. But I think we have to be political.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Josh, for all the great work that you do, and to all the other public officers in the room who are making public realms so accessible. And Georgeen, thank you so much for your great presentation. Always been a fan of Interboro. I have two questions. One is around what, I saw in some of your projects, you're pulling power and water, and sometimes these, just on the site for temporary installations, it can be so difficult to coordinate and move things on a timeline. So do you have any advice for us, best practices, when it comes to implementing temporary, both from the agency perspective, but also from a designer's perspective? And then the second question I have is do you recommend, or have you thought of, being able to document the pilots through post-occupancy surveys so that they then can inform the more capital-intensive permanent improvements? Maybe they're not coming, but is there something that can then feed into the RFPs that come out for the permanent improvements later? So.
Well, that first question, I think that's why we partner with Interboro, to figure some of those tricky things out, right? Like, I think our role in that is play connector, to provide technical assistance and liaise with our city agency partners to allow permitting and all those things, and sort of, use our networks to identify the right neighborhood partners, perhaps, if there's a neighborhood specifically that we're working in. So I'll throw it over to Georgeen to talk about some best practices with, looking for the right tools to use.
No, we did do post-occupancy surveys, and in the sort of the later renditions, as I showed, we also did different ways of collecting the data to demonstrate the impact in terms of the change in temperature. But the bottom line is that these projects are woefully underfunded. I mean, we just, a lot of the work that we did, or that we need to do, is underfunded, and so we would like to really do more. And I think it's a really difficult balance, because when you're doing these types of projects, the budget is, the budgets that are allocated to these kinds of projects are very low, and often insufficient to do all the things that we know as to being the best practice. So that's a little bit of a challenge, and sometimes a little bit depressing about the process. I think that, I think one of the things that I've been wondering about is really how to, I think that we have these kinds of projects that have been these pilots that are very experimental, they're very low cost, and then there are these kind of very, very big infrastructure projects that have budgets that are, thousands of times of, in terms of the kind of the value. And I do think that it would be interesting to think about, I mean, people don't want more regulation, but I think with like these kinds of bigger infrastructure projects, it would be interesting to have like a 1% or some kind of way of allocating a certain percentage of the projects, not only for the larger A&E firms to bring in smaller firms to play a meaningful role. And by meaningful, I mean not only in terms of design input, but really to be, part of the kind of the larger investment that's going into it, like to actually get, a portion of those fees. But I think it would be really interesting to think about how to build that into projects where you have a certain percentage that requires innovation in one of these, say one of these environmental factors, like, sound or noise or heat or, air quality. Because otherwise, I think, there's no incentive for these bigger projects to bring that kind of thinking on board.
Yeah, and I'll just add to the documenting and demonstrating the impact of these projects. And so I shared a couple of the tools in the slides that we used, and we worked with Gail and a couple other partners. There's a tool called SoPlay and SoPark that you can document pre and post sort of changes in behavior and all those types of things. But also documenting the process is super important, and figuring out ways that we can continue to document these things and understand the success, and then demonstrate to our partners who are doing neighborhood planning processes and all those things, the ways to weave this into those longer term plans, right? And to make them sort of impact longer term change. I think we're still working on that a little bit. Like post-pandemic, we're sort of up and running our placemaking program again. We want to have a more robust sort of evaluation period. I think we have a different contracting structure that we're hopeful that will allow us to be a little bit more flexible, spend enough time on engagement as needed, but also go back and do post-occupancy surveys and observations to really sort of start to document and demonstrate the impact of these temporary pop-up projects, right? And then share them with their agency partners and figure out ways that this can be better woven into the longer term planning processes.
I do think one of the challenges that we face with the work that we've done is that everybody wants they want a little handbook that says how can you do a cooling station? And there are when we first started the project, you can go buy a tent that you plug into hose and you get misting. And that's what people do at concerts and marathons and so on. And I think that it is important to democratize this work, but at the same time, I think what we were really trying to do was to do something that was hyper-specific, that built on the physical fabric that was in one particular place. And so in the end, I'm a little bit torn because, yeah, it would be great to have a how-to, and we have a handbook that says these are the materials that we use, and this is how you can set it up. But I do think that there's a very specific design input that is needed if you want to make it something more than just a pop-up tent. If you want to make it something that's really built onto the kind of the physical fabric of a very specific place.
Yeah, and I think if we were able to continue the Refreshing Waters project, which unfortunately because of contracting and city budgets and things we weren't able to, we would have went back and probably made some changes to it, right? Continued to get input and feedback from the community, because some people liked some aspects, some people didn't. We probably would have modified the design a little bit. And I think that just goes to show that a kit of parts can't be the end all for everything. You can't just replicate this everywhere. It needs to be specific and unique to the neighborhood that it's in.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. This is more like a comment. I was thinking how these systems, like the healthcare system, the sanitation systems, have been set up to be problem solvers instead of prevention systems, especially how they frame themselves spatially. So you go to a hospital to get fixed, or it's not a place to be well, just having a place to develop or feel better, So I'm just thinking that this is the steps into how this whole systems could be reframed, and maybe spatially all these other agencies and collaborations with architecture and design could turn into better places for people to develop, for people to enjoy. So I'm just happy to see all those examples, and thank you so much.
Well, I work at the Bureau of Chronic Disease Prevention, so we're trying to make sure that people don't have to go to the hospital, right? But yeah, no, that's exactly right, and that's the work that we're trying to do.
So, thank you both for your presentations, fantastic, and for Ben's questions. And I'm kind of in favor of some overarching think tank that allows all those agencies to go through. But
well, they have to have control. That's the point.
Yeah. But my question is actually specifically for Josh, and that is, do you get involved, does your department get involved with kind of early planning phases at DCP?
We're trying to figure out a better way to do that. So, we do have good partnerships with city planning, but, it depends on who we talk to, right? And so like there's, you know, we're working really closely. We have within our agency, we have a health equity and urban planning internal work group. And so that includes my group and then folks from environmental health, folks from mental hygiene, to really think about how the health department can better insert themselves and add value to the process, right? How can we provide health data that's meaningful to our agency partners? And so that's an ongoing conversation. But yeah, like that's certainly we're trying to figure out how to do that more
Just to give you a
systematically.
little background. So I'm on my community board in Queens, and we're reviewing a rezoning for One Long Island City. And our biggest hue and cry as the community board to DCP is, how are you providing public spaces? And what is the quality of them? And how, you know, how can you go forward and build, because the homeless issue, the housing issue, they're all tied to public space. Because as we continue, and there's a need obviously for housing, but as we continue to build more and more, there's going to be more need for public space. I don't know what the ratio is, but it's quite low in most communities in terms of the amount of square footage per resident. And it's an interesting factor to evaluate and understand relative to the work you guys are doing. So that's a thank you. I didn't remember the number.
Yeah, exactly. And how do we have more public space in a zone that's supposed to be, you know, super dense and more high rises and all those things? So where do we provide that public space and think about that differently?
Developers get extra FAR for building higher if they add a public space, but it kind of negates each other, because if you're adding more people, that means you need even more public space. So it's a dilemma.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentations and the discussion. You mentioned earlier something more akin to like a performance or like use-based process for how firms are compensated for the work that they do. Do you feel like there's room for that in the way that the system operates currently, working with city agencies and how budgets are allocated between city agencies and how those projects are selected for private, you know, partnerships?
I'm not involved in any of those things. Since I'm at the health department, we don't build anything, but others who have worked for the city might have a better idea about those things.
Could you repeat the question?
So earlier you mentioned how really small budget projects, so they may have great impact because they're such small projects and the budgets are so low, the amount of money that is then, you know, brought into the firm as a result of these projects isn't necessarily proportionate with the impact that they have. So I guess I'm wondering, do you feel like there's any room for performance or the use of these projects to be tied more directly back to the impact that they have in the communities, if they are potentially city, you know, city financed projects?
I think that would be an area of, you know, important work to do. I think that there isn't anything like that right now, and I think that, you know, you also have to like come to some kind of consensus about what those metrics are, and I think that work hasn't. People aren't in agreement, right, about what you know, how do we measure success? So I don't know. Maybe we need to have a working group at the AIA about that.
Well, I like the dilemma of performance in a pilot project is only assessed afterwards, so funding it needs to happen before. But I liked the idea both that the city may have a kind of a fund for pilot projects that simply are, you know, to a certain budget threshold, but they're anticipating the benefit of experimentally testing different approaches at a smaller scale, with the idea that where they prove to succeed, they might be implemented at a larger scale. I really liked your idea as well of having, you know, we have 1% for art, and I love art in public space, but why not 1% for a piece of the work that's also, you know, along the, at least the role that you're talking about being part of the team and potentially also having a bit more of a pilot or something in a larger project that's part of that much larger funding stream, you know, that's testing out ideas that the city would like to see if there's a benefit there, and capture the assessment afterwards. So those could be two ways. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think we at the health department, of course, are always trying to think of ways to better evaluate city projects, and especially the work that we do. Like, what are the right metrics? And I think Georgene is right. Like, it's not an agreement yet. Like, how does this impact X, Y, and Z? And I think our agency partners are also interested in understanding sort of the return on investment, whether that's economic growth in a certain neighborhood, and from a health perspective, what is the return on sort of promoting better health, right? And so I think there should be work groups and the city agencies and the private sector as well to sort of share that thought process. I think there are healthy building certification systems that are starting to do those things, right? Like Fitwell and Well Building Standard and USGBC as well. Like, they're starting to gather some of those metrics, and I think there's a lot of other people thinking about this, but you know, how to implement it on a city-wide sort of basis is sort of TBD, but certainly something that we're interested in.
I mean, just thinking out loud, you know, to the comment before about these other programs related to the scaffolding or the bike rack. I think doing like one-time, almost like competition or program that is not a commitment is a really good way to innovate. So I think one of the things that was really interesting about Rebuild by Design was that, you know, that project really sought to so basically, you know, normally when you have federal dollars going for community development block grants, they go from the federal government directly to a locality, and then the locality decides how they want to spend it. And in that process, there was just a very small percentage of that funding that was then, you know, given to a competition to innovate around design. And so I think one approach would be to kind of figure out like a vehicle of one kind of building program that we have in the city, where we could say like, oh, for just this one, you know, for this 1 year, for this one type of project, we're going to do this, because then everybody's like, well, oh, it's only once. We don't have to commit to it. It's fine. And then you just see whether or not it works. I think there have been so many examples around the world where people have used like what we're talking today about temporary projects, like using a temporary thing to just test something out and seeing how it works without having to get everybody to agree on the long-term plan and rules.
Shall we wrap up there? I think it was like an amazing conversation. I want to say thank you so much, Georgene and Josh. And thank you all for coming out tonight. I hope you'll come back to our subsequent dialogues and also to the exhibition in October. So thank you, everyone.